This episode of Marijuana Today Daily is brought to you by MJ Today Media, publishers of this podcast, our flagship show Marijuana Today, as well as the Weed Wonks and Green Rush podcasts. If you have a legal marijuana brand, service, product, or company that you want to promote to the best audience in legal cannabis, then look no further than MJ Today Media. We have national reach and our audience is made up of thousands and thousands of legal marijuana nerds. Big old marijuana nerds, huge cannabis geeks who just dork out all day long over legal marijuana business, politics, and activism, just like you and just like me. Reach our awesomely cannabis nerdy listeners by becoming a sponsor of MJ Today Media. Just email me at shay@mjtodaymedia.com with Shay spelled S-H-E-A. Good morning, Marijuana Nation. It's Friday, March 19th, 2021, and you're tuned in to episode 1034 of Marijuana Today Daily. I'm your host, Shay Gunther, and I'll be walking you through today's marijuana news and headlines. As always, we have a full and busy day of cannabis news in our hands, so let's jump right into it. We revisit yesterday's top stories today with the Safe Banking Act being officially reintroduced yesterday into the U.S. House of Representatives. Word started to percolate out on Wednesday that would happen, and yesterday Colorado Representative Earl Perlmutter resubmitted his legislation, which now has 102 co-sponsors, and that would, if made into law, remove federal penalties for banks and financial institutions from working with the legal cannabis industry. A companion bill will be introduced next week into the Senate, which is now in the control of Democrats after being known as Mitch McConnell's legislative graveyard for the past 6 years. The passage of the Safe Banking Act would be fairly monumental for legal cannabis, as right now banking and finance is just a huge pain in the butt for legal marijuana. Kyle Yeager has a good detailed take on this over at Marijuana Moment. Story number 2 does not drift too far from our top headline, with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer again rolling in deep with support for legalizing marijuana at the federal level. This is another well-trod-upon as of late storyline, as Senator Schumer has said a handful of times in recent months that marijuana reform is a major priority of the Democratic Party. Yesterday, Senator Schumer spoke online with Senators Ron Wyden of Oregon and Cory Booker of New Jersey and talked about legislation the three of them are working on to lift marijuana prohibition. Specifically, Senator Schumer talked about the need to ensure that the legal marijuana industry was not dominated by the alcohol and tobacco industries, saying, quote, "The legislation that we have will make sure that small businesses in communities of color, get the advantage because communities of color have paid the price for decades. They should at least get something back," unquote. Another good one to read in full, if only to watch the video of the three senators' conversation yourself. As we always do, we have all the news we link to over on our website at mjtodaydaily.com. We bounce to Delaware for our final top story, where legislation to legalize adult-use marijuana was introduced yesterday. House Bill 150, also known as the Delaware Marijuana Control Act, would set up a taxed and regulated adult-use marijuana sales program built around a 15% sales tax. If passed into law, HB 150 would have the state issue 30 dispensary licenses in the first 16 months after launch, with provisions built in for social equity applicants. It also includes a mechanism for people to have past cannabis charges on their record expunged, though that process is not automatic. And sadly, the bill does not allow for home grow, which is kind of a big deal these days. It's not really true legalization if the police are still worried about what kind of plants you're growing at home. So that's something to note. WDEL's story on this is worthy of a read and includes a longer form FAQ on all the particulars of Delaware's HB 150. If you're in the state or have it on your industry radar, definitely worth a click over. Those are the top stories for today. It's time for Marijuana Today Daily Headlines Blitz. Before we blitz out in headlines, let's quickly thank our sponsor, MJ Today Media, publishers of this podcast, our flagship show, Marijuana Today, as well as the Weed Wonks and Green Rush podcasts. Here's the great thing that MJ Today Media can do for your legal marijuana business, brand, service, or company. we can introduce you to the national legal marijuana industry. Our shows are listened to by people all over the country, people who are most likely involved in some kind of legal marijuana business. We have bud tenders tuning in, as well as CEOs, venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, CMOs, merchandisers, processors, researchers, academics, regulators, and policy makers. We pretty much have the entire legal marijuana spectrum covered. So if you want to make a name for yourself or your business, we can help. Just email me at shay@mjtodaymedia.com to learn more. We have sponsorship packages for companies of all sizes, so it doesn't matter if your budget is $100 a month or $10,000. We can help. One more time, just email me at shay@mjtodaymedia.com to get started making the best marketing decision you will ever make. All right, time for the Blitz. John Schroyer over Marijuana Business Daily has an important pickup of news out of California, where the bulk of the state's licensed marijuana business operators are caught in a bit of licensing purgatory, with their license type being classed as provisional rather than the permanent annual type. The provisional status is usually reserved for companies that are in the process of getting all of their licensing ducks in a row, but in California, more than 80% of all legal marijuana business licenses are classed as provisional. This is actually a rather longer-running storyline in the Golden State, with John noting that it's the third time in 4 years that the state has been hit with a large chunk of its licensing operators facing some kind of provisional licensing deadline, which has then gotten kicked down the road in the past. That will also likely happen again, this time with a proposed bill already in the works in the legislature set to extend things, but the source problem remains, as the state just has not been able to get through the licensing process quickly enough. Multi-state operator Cresco Labs is buying up Massachusetts company Cultivate for $90 million in cash and stock, with an additional $68 million available as an earnout. The acquisition gives Cresco 42,000 square feet of canopy space in the state to open dispensaries and planned expansions for one more dispensary and another 20,000 square feet in growing space. Canada's Ontario Cannabis Store just announced that it will be led by its sixth different leader in 3 years, with Thomas Haig stepping down after he was appointed interim president in September. Marijuana Business Daily notes that in the past 3 years, the OCS has had 6 leaders, of which only 2 were actual full-time CEOs, and that the other 4 were all working in interim or acting bases. Bases? The Hexo Corp just released its Q2 2021 figures for the period ending January 31st. The Canadian company said that for that 3-month stretch, it pulled in total net revenue of $26.2 million, up from $23.4 million the previous quarter. That sat atop a net loss of $16 million, a marked improvement over the $237.8 million the company lost during Q2 of 2020. Deborah Borchardt over Green Market Report has all the other details and whatnot here if you need them. Canadian marijuana giant Canopy Growth has taken out a loan of $750 million with an option to tack on another $500 million with investment firm King Street Capital Management. The company said that the funds will be used for general corporate things. The loan matures in March of 2026 and carries an interest rate of 9.5%. Marijuana Business Daily has another corporate-y headline, as the investment fund New Lake Capital Partners and the real estate investment trust Green Acres are merging in a deal that creates a company with $435 million in cash and assets to invest in legal cannabis. The new company will be called New Lake Capital Partners and will have a portfolio of owned properties stretching across 9 states with tenants like Columbia Care, Cresco, and our own sponsor, Curaleaf. And finally for today and for the week, we have news of a bill just introduced into the U.S. Senate that would allow state legal marijuana businesses increased access to business insurance. Just as banking is a world that is federally constrained for legal cannabis operators, the world of insurance is likewise, as it's difficult to impossible for businesses like cultivators and dispensaries to get proper business insurance coverage. Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey's bill, titled the Clarifying Law Around Insurance of Marijuana Act, or the CLAIM Act, would bar the federal government from penalizing insurance companies for working with state legal marijuana businesses. A companion bill in the House is expected to be filed sometime soon by Representative Nydia Velázquez of New York. Those are the headlines and news for the day. I'll be back with you again Tuesday morning with another information-packed episode of Marijuana Today Daily. But in the meantime, if you have any stories to share or feedback to give, zip us an email to headlines@mjtodaydaily.com. And while you're clicking around the interwebs, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com to find links to all of the news we cover. Thanks to our sponsor, MJ Today Media, and two of our awesome patron listeners for the support that makes this show possible. To join the illustrious ranks of the patron listeners yourself, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com and click on that big blue button at the top of the page that says Become a Patron. I'm your host, Shay Gunther. Thanks for tuning in and starting your day with marijuana today. Today.
One take, Shay. One take.